The air in the private banquet hall is thick with the scent of pine, roasted duck, and money. It's the kind of expensive, suffocating warmth that makes you feel poor just by breathing it. Everyone is laughing. That loud, braying laugh people use when they want you to know how happy and successful they are. They are toasting my brother Lennox. He just made vice president at some soulless firm that probably sells debt to developing nations. My sister Mallory drapes herself over her fiancé, flashing a new watch that costs more than my car. A car I no longer have. They talk about wealth like it's a language I can't speak, like I'm not even here, like I'm a ghost at their feast, the broke, awkward nobody they left behind years ago. I just sit here, a small island of quiet in their sea of noise. My hands folded in my lap. I came tonight hoping for something. A thread of connection, maybe. A memory of the family we used to be before Mom was gone, and money became their only god. I was a fool. Mallory catches my eye. Her smile is a sharp, polished thing. She holds up her wrist. Isn't it divine, Bryn? The jeweler said the stones were exceptional, and that's when I see it. My blood turns to ice. My breath catches in my throat. It's not just a watch. Decorating the band, glinting under the chandelier, are 5 familiar sapphires. Deep blue, like a twilight sky. My mother's sapphire necklace, the one she promised me, the one they cut into pieces. They butchered it. They sold my mother's memory for parts and turned it into a trinket. My face burns. My stomach twists into a knot of pure, cold rage. You were always too sentimental, Mallory says, her voice dripping with pity. It's just stuff, Bryn. It was gathering dust. I don't scream. I don't cry. I just sip my water, the glass cool against my trembling lips, and I nod. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reach into my simple clutch. I pull out a plain black folder and set it on the pristine white tablecloth. The sound is soft, but it cuts through the laughter like a gunshot. Everyone quiets. Lennox lowers his champagne flute. Mallory's smile falters. This, I say, my voice steady, is the deed. Their eyes are glued to the folder. Confusion wars with arrogance on their faces. The jewelry store, I continue, letting each word hang in the air. The one you all sold Mom's collection to. Velasco and Harper. I pause, letting them connect the dots. I bought it. Last month. Mallory's wineglass trembles in her hand, a droplet of red spilling onto the cloth like a drop of blood. Lennox has gone completely pale, his face a mask of disbelief, and for the first time in my entire life I smile at them. A real smile. The kind of smile you wear when you've won. You want to know how we got here? Here's what happened when they called me a nobody, and I became the owner. The annual farewell Christmas dinner used to be my favorite night of the year. When Mom was alive, it was magic. Our house would be filled with light and laughter, the real kind, not this hollow performance. Now it's just a stage for my siblings' success, held in the sterile grandeur of a luxury resort banquet hall. I'd walked in tonight hoping, as I always did, for a flicker of that old warmth, a fool's hope. The moment I stepped through the door in my simple wool dress, the one I'd saved for months to buy, I felt their judgment wash over me. Mallory, draped in shimmering sequins that probably cost more than my rent, gave me a once-over, her lips curling into a pitying smile. Oh, Bryn, that's quaint. Lennox didn't even bother with a pretense of kindness. He was holding court by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, boasting about a recent stock market win. He glanced at me, then immediately turned back to his audience of sycophants. As I was saying, the key is to be aggressive. You can't get anywhere in life by playing it safe. The jab was meant for me, of course. It always was. I was Bryn, the quiet librarian. Bryn, the unambitious one. Bryn, who didn't understand the thrill of the chase, the rush of a hostile takeover, the beauty of a bottom line. I found a seat at the far end of the long, polished table, hoping to become invisible. Uncle Ronan, our mother's brother, and the executor of her will, gave me a weak, apologetic smile from across the room. He was a good man, I think, but a man perpetually bent by the will of stronger, louder people. He was the perpetual enabler, always murmuring, "That's just how things are," as if it were a law of nature. Dinner was a performance of wealth. They discussed their portfolios, their upcoming trip to St. Bart's, the merits of German engineering versus Italian. I ate my salad in silence, each bite a small act of endurance. Then the conversation turned, as it often did, to the estate, to Mom's things. We really did get a fantastic price for the silver, Lennox said, spearing a piece of duck. Cleared out a lot of clutter. My fork stilled. Clutter. He was talking about our mother's life. Mallory chimed in, preening. And her jewelry. Honestly, it was so dated. Much better to liquidate and invest the capital. It's what she would have wanted. A cold dread started to seep into my bones. What jewelry? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Mallory sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. All of it, Bryn. We sold it a few months ago. Honestly, keep up. A few months ago. Without telling me, without asking me. They had gone through our mother's things, her intimate personal treasures, and sold them like scrap metal. Even the sapphire necklace. The words felt like stones in my mouth. That necklace was everything. I remember being a little girl, sitting on her bed, watching her fasten the clasp. She'd told me, her eyes soft, "One day, this will be yours, my quiet little star. It matches your eyes." Lennox laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, come on, Bryn. You can't have seriously believed that. Mom said things like that all the time. She never meant it." Mallory then held up her wrist, and the world stopped. There, on a brand new gold bracelet, were the sapphires. 5 of them. They had taken my necklace, my promised inheritance, my last tangible link to my mother's love, and they had cannibalized it for a gaudy trinket. My heart didn't just break, it shattered. It atomized. The pieces were so small, I didn't think they could ever be put back together. "It looks better this way, don't you think?" Mallory asked, admiring her wrist. "Modern. Fresh." I couldn't breathe. The air was too thick, the room was too bright, their voices were too loud. I felt the hot sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give them the satisfaction. "Mom never meant it seriously," Lennox repeated, twisting the knife. "You were always too sentimental, Bryn. You attach emotion to objects. It's a weakness in this world." I stood up, my chair scraping against the marble floor, every head turned towards me. For 1 second, I had their full attention. I saw pity in Uncle Ronan's eyes, contempt in Lennox's, and a cruel, smiling triumph in Mallory's. They expected tears. They expected a scene. They expected the poor emotional little sister to fall apart. I gave them nothing. I just picked up my coat and walked out of the room, out of the resort, and into the cold, cleansing snow. The city lights blurred as I walked, each step a silent vow. The humiliation was a fire in my gut, burning away the grief, burning away the weakness. This was the last time. This was the last time they would make me feel small. This was the last time they would call me nobody. My silence was over. That night, their cruelty wasn't just an insult, it was an ignition. The silence of my small apartment was a welcome relief, after the cacophony of my family, but the quiet couldn't numb the hollow ache in my chest. For days, I moved through my life like a ghost, the memory of Mallory's bracelet playing on a loop in my mind, the butchered sapphires, my mother's promise, Lennox's dismissive laugh. It all swirled together into a bitter cocktail of grief and rage. I needed to do something, to see something, to connect with the past they were so eager to erase. A week after that disastrous Christmas dinner, I found myself driving to my mother's house, or what used to be her house. After she passed, Lennox and Mallory had been quick to manage the property, which meant putting it on the market as fast as humanly possible. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I used my old key, my hand trembling slightly as I pushed open the door. The smell hit me first. Not the familiar scent of Mom's rose potpourri and old books, but the sterile, chemical smell of fresh paint and cleaning solution. The house was empty. Not just empty of furniture, but empty of life, of memory. They had stripped it bare. The walls were a bland, market-friendly beige. The carpets she'd loved, with their intricate floral patterns, had been torn out and replaced with cheap gray laminate flooring. I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing in the void. Her kitchen, where she taught me to bake, was now just a collection of stainless steel appliances. Her study, where she'd read to me for hours, was just a box with a window. Finally, I went upstairs to her bedroom. My breath hitched. This was the room I was dreading the most. It was here she'd shown me the necklace. It was here she'd held me when I was sick. It was here she'd been her. Now it was just 4 beige walls. The closet doors stood ajar, revealing nothing but empty hangers. The drawers of her built-in vanity were all pulled out, vacant. They hadn't left a single thing, not a photograph, not a stray bobby pin, not a forgotten scarf. It was a complete and total erasure. They hadn't just sold her things, they had tried to delete her. I sank to the floor, the cold of the laminate seeping through my jeans. The tears I'd refused to cry at dinner finally came, hot and silent. I was crying for my mother, for the house, for the girl who believed in promises. As I sat there, a small broken heap on the floor, my hand brushed against the back of the vanity's bottom drawer. I felt a small piece of paper, taped to the wood. My fingers fumbled with it, pulling it free. It was a receipt, old and faded, the ink slightly blurred, but the name at the top was clear as day: Velasco and Harper Fine Jewelry. Below it, an item description: cleaning and clasp repair, sapphire and diamond necklace. The date was from 3 years ago. My heart started to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm. This was it. This was the place. This was where they'd taken it. I folded the receipt carefully, tucking it into my pocket like a sacred relic. Back in my apartment, the grief began to recede, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my determined face. I typed Velasco and Harper Fine Jewelry into the search bar. The website was old, clunky, like something from the early 2000s. It spoke of a family-owned business, generations of craftsmanship, a commitment to tradition. But as I dug deeper, reading local business articles and reviews, a different story emerged. The owner, Mr. Velasco, the son of the original founder, was in his late 70s. The articles mentioned declining sales, the struggle to compete with online retailers and big-box jewelry chains. One piece hinted that he was considering retirement. The store was struggling. The betrayal from my family was a deep, raw wound. But a new idea, sharp and terrifying and thrilling, began to form in the back of my mind. They had taken my mother's legacy and sold it for parts. They thought its story was over. But what if it wasn't? What if I could get it back? Not just the necklace, but the place where her memory had been so carelessly discarded. What if I could reclaim something? Anything. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The plan was insane. I was a librarian, not a businesswoman. I had a little savings, but nothing close to what it would take to buy a fine jewelry store, even a failing one. But the image of Mallory's bracelet, of the empty house, of that small forgotten receipt, it pushed me forward. With a deep breath, I clicked on the Contact Us page. I found a general inquiry email address. My heart hammered against my ribs as I began to type. To whom it may concern, I wrote, I am making an inquiry regarding the potential sale of the business known as Velasco and Harper. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The little swoosh of the sent email felt like the first shot fired in a war I didn't even know how to fight. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of power. They had left me with nothing, and in doing so they had given me a reason to build everything. A week passed, then 2. My inbox remained stubbornly empty, save for the usual junk mail and library newsletters. The flicker of power I'd felt after sending the email had dimmed to a low, anxious hum. I started to think I had been foolish. Of course, the owner of a fine jewelry store wouldn't respond to a vague, anonymous email. I was just a librarian playing at being a tycoon in my tiny apartment. I was about to give up, to relegate the whole idea to a fantasy born of grief, when a new email popped up. The sender wasn't Velasco and Harper. The name was Mirel de Castro. The subject line was a single, blunt word: inquiry. My hands trembled as I opened it. The message was short and to the point. Mr. Velasco forwarded me your email. He is not interested in tire kickers. If you are serious, meet me tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Here's the address. The address wasn't for the elegant downtown storefront of Velasco and Harper. It was for a place on the other side of town, a gritty industrial neighborhood I rarely drove through. The name of the business was The Alchemist's Shelf. I looked it up. It was a pawn shop. The next day, after my shift at the library, I drove to the address. The Alchemist's Shelf was sandwiched between a laundromat and a check-cashing place. The windows were barred, and a simple hand-painted sign hung above the door. It was a world away from the velvet-lined displays and champagne-sipping clientele of my family's world. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy door. A little bell chimed. The air inside smelled of old paper, metal polish, and something else, a kind of quiet history. The shop was crowded, but meticulously organized. Glass cases held a strange assortment of items: tarnished silver lockets, vintage watches, old military medals, and a surprising number of beautiful, if not flashy, pieces of jewelry. Behind the counter stood a woman who I knew had to be Mirelle de Castro. She was probably in her 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a simple black dress, her only adornment a striking silver cuff on one wrist. She didn't smile. "You're the email," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Bryn Farewell," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Mirelle gestured to the stool in front of the counter. "Mr. Velasco is an old friend. He's tired, he wants to sell, but he doesn't want his family's legacy turned into a soulless chain, so he sends the curious ones to me." I sort the wheat from the chaff. Her gaze was intense, analytical. "So, tell me, Bryn Farewell, why do you want to buy a dying jewelry store?" I hesitated. I couldn't tell her the whole truth. It was too raw, too personal, so I told her a version of it. "My mother loved that store. She was a loyal customer. She passed away recently, and I want to preserve something that was important to her." Mirelle leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Preservation is expensive. It requires more than sentiment. It requires knowledge. What do you know about jewelry?" I'm a fast learner," I stammered. She let out a short, dry laugh. "Everyone says that." She reached under the counter and pulled out a jeweler's loupe and a small, unmounted diamond. "Look at this. Tell me what you see." I took the loupe, my hand clumsy. I'd only ever seen these in movies. I held it to my eye and peered at the stone. It was sparkly. "It's a diamond," I offered weakly. Mirelle sighed, taking the stone and loupe back. "It's a Psi 2 clarity, G color, with a pore cut that kills its fire. It's worth about half of what a layperson would guess. You see, a stone's value isn't just in its size, it's in its story, its flaws, its history, its journey. The same is true for people." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. "You're not here just to preserve something. There's anger in you. I can see it. It's coiled up tight, right behind your eyes." I was stunned into silence. She saw right through me. "Grief is a powerful fuel," Mirelle said, her voice softening slightly. "It can burn you down, or it can forge you into something stronger. It can be power, if you're willing to work for it. Real work, not just sending emails." She stood up. "The offer stands. You want to learn this business? You be here every day after your library job. You'll sweep floors, you'll polish silver, and you'll listen. You won't get paid a dime. In a month we'll see if you're still a fast learner." It was a test, a challenge. She was offering me a key, but she was making damn sure I was willing to turn the lock myself. "I'll be here tomorrow," I said, my voice firm. A flicker of something, respect maybe, crossed her face. "We'll see," was all she said. I walked out of that pawn shop, feeling more alive than I had in years. Mirelle was right. The grief was there, the anger was there, but for the first time, I had a place to pour it. I had a purpose. I was going to learn the story of stones, so I could rewrite my own. The next month was a blur of exhaustion and education. Every day I would finish my shift at the library, the quiet hum of the archives still in my ears, and drive straight to the Alchemist's Shelf. Mirelle was true to her word. My first week was spent with a broom and a polishing cloth. I swept the dusty floors, cleaned the glass display cases until they gleamed, and learned the painstaking process of polishing tarnished silver, my fingers stained black by the end of each night. It was humbling, grueling work. My body ached in ways it never had from shelving books. But I never complained. I just showed up, day after day. Mirelle would watch me from behind the counter, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She rarely offered praise, but I could feel her testing my resolve. After that first week, she finally sat me down at the workbench. "The value is in the details," she said, placing a tangle of old gold chains in front of me. "First you learn the metals." She taught me how to identify the faint maker's marks, to feel the difference in weight between 14-karat and 18-karat gold, to spot the telltale signs of plating wearing thin. My world, which had once been categorized by the Dewey Decimal System, was now organized by purity marks and the soft, buttery glow of true gold. Soon, I graduated to stones. She taught me about the 4 C's: cut, color, clarity, and carat, but she also taught me about the 5th C: character. "Anyone can look at a certificate," she'd say, holding a sapphire up to the light, "but you need to look at the stone. Does it have life? Does it have a soul? This one has seen things." She taught me how to use the loupe properly, how to spot the tiny inclusions that made each stone unique, how to differentiate a natural gem from a synthetic one. She told me stories of the pieces that passed through her shop: a simple silver locket that had survived a war, a string of pearls bought with a year's savings by a young man for his sweetheart, an emerald ring that a woman had sold to fund her escape from an abusive husband. "Jewelry isn't just an accessory, Bryn," Myriel told me one evening as we were closing up. "It's a vessel. It holds our stories, our hopes, our heartbreaks. When people sell a piece, they're not just selling gold and stone, they're selling a chapter of their life." Her words resonated deep within me. My family saw my mother's necklace as stuff, as capital. They had stripped it of its story. Myriel was teaching me how to see that story, not just in my mother's jewelry, but in every piece I touched. My confidence grew, but so did my exhaustion. I was working 7 days a week, falling into bed long after midnight, my head buzzing with carat weights and jewelry eras. I was living on coffee and sheer determination. There were moments of doubt, moments when I would sit in my car in the pawnshop parking lot, my body screaming for rest, and wonder if I was completely insane. I was a librarian. What was I doing trying to enter this high-stakes world? But then I would remember Mallory's smug smile, Lennox's condescending tone, and the cold, empty rooms of my mother's house, and I would get out of the car and walk through the door. One night, a man came in with a beautiful Art Deco ring. He claimed it was a family heirloom and wanted a high price. I examined it, my fingers tracing the intricate filigree. It was beautiful, but something felt off. The cut of the small diamonds seemed too modern for the period. The setting was just a little too clean. I remembered what Mireille had taught me about tool marks. I discreetly checked the inside of the band with my loupe. The marks were from modern tools. It was a reproduction, a very good one, but a fake. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, my heart pounding. "We can't purchase this." He started to argue, but Mireille stepped in, her presence formidable. She looked at the ring, then at me, then back at the man. "My associate has a good eye," she said firmly. "We're not interested." The man snatched the ring and stormed out. When he was gone, Mireille turned to me. A rare, small smile touched her lips. "You were right," she said. "You saw the story. Not the one he was telling, but the true one." The praise was simple, but it felt like winning a war. It was more than just identifying a fake ring. I was learning to trust my own judgment, to see beyond the surface. Mireille leaned against the counter. "They'll underestimate you your whole life, Bryn. They'll see a quiet librarian. They'll see a sentimental girl. They won't see the steel you're building inside. Let them. One day, they'll walk into your store, and you'll be the one behind the counter, and they'll call you ma'am." Her words were a promise, a prophecy. They became my mantra during the long nights and the grueling days that followed. I wasn't just learning about jewelry anymore. I was learning about power, the quiet, observant, unshakable kind. The knowledge I was gaining from Mirelle was priceless, but knowledge alone wouldn't buy a business. I needed capital, real capital. My modest savings account, accumulated from years of frugal living as a librarian, was a drop in the ocean of what I'd need, so I put on my most professional blazer, printed out a business plan filled with charts and projections, and walked into the first bank. The loan officer, a man with a slick smile and dismissive eyes, listened to my pitch with barely concealed boredom. He glanced at my application, saw librarian under current occupation, and none under business ownership experience. "I'm sorry, Miss Farewell," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Your proposal is ambitious. But without significant collateral or a proven track record, the bank can't take on this level of risk." The rejection stung, but I expected it. I went to a second bank, a smaller credit union. The loan officer there was kinder, more patient. She looked over my plan carefully. "This is well researched," she admitted. "But the numbers are tight. Jewelry retail is a tough market. We'd need to see a much larger personal investment from you." Denied, again. The rejections were a harsh dose of reality. The world ran on money and experience, and I was short on both. Despair began to creep in. I sat in my car after the second denial, the pristine business plan on the passenger seat mocking me. Maybe Lennox and Mallory were right. Maybe I was just a sentimental fool, out of my depth. I drove to Myrelle's shop, my shoulders slumped in defeat. I told her about the banks, the dismissive looks, the polite but firm rejections. She listened without interruption, polishing a silver bracelet as I spoke. When I finished, she set the bracelet down. "Did you think it would be easy?" she asked, her voice calm. "They look at your life on paper, and they see a risk. They don't see the fire. You have to give them something they can't ignore." "But what?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I have nothing left to give." "That's not true," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You have your time, you have your mind, and you have that old car you drive." The next day, I sold my car. It wasn't much, just a 10-year-old sedan, but the few $1,000s I got for it felt like a fortune. It was freedom and independence, and I traded it for a bus pass and a little more runway. That money went directly into my education. I enrolled in online certification courses from the Gemological Institute of America. My nights were no longer just for exhaustion, they were for studying the intricacies of diamond grading, the history of period jewelry, and the complex science of gem identification. My apartment became a chaotic library of textbooks and stone charts. My weekends were spent at the alchemist's shelf, no longer just polishing silver, but actively helping Muriel with appraisals and purchases. I started to develop a feel for the business, an intuition for what would sell. Muriel began to trust me more, sending me to meet with small-time wholesalers. It was on one of these meetings that I faced my first real test. I was meeting a dealer who had a parcel of what he claimed were high-quality tourmalines. They were beautiful, a deep, vibrant green. The price was good, almost too good. I remembered Muriel's warning: if a deal feels too good to be true, it's because it's a lie. I examined the stones carefully with my loupe. My GIA course had just covered synthetics and treatments. I saw something, a tiny series of parallel lines inside one of the stones that didn't look like a natural inclusion. I held another up to the light, turning it over and over. I saw a faint flash of a different color, a telltale sign of a doublet, a stone made of two separate pieces glued together. He had salted the parcel. A few real, high-quality stones mixed in with a lot of convincing fakes and treated gems. My stomach churned. He was trying to cheat me. My old self, the quiet, non-confrontational librarian, would have just made an excuse and left. But the woman Muriel was forging was different. "These are beautiful," I said calmly, pushing the parcel back across the table. "But I'm afraid my client is only interested in untreated natural stones. Several of these are doublets, and I suspect the rest are heavily treated." The wholesaler's friendly demeanor vanished. His face hardened. He scooped up the stones and grumbled, "Your loss, lady." I walked away from that table feeling a surge of adrenaline. I had lost the deal, but I hadn't been a fool. I hadn't been cheated. I had protected Muriel's money and my own integrity. I had held my ground. That night, exhausted and smelling of bus fumes, I was hunched over my laptop, studying charts of gemstone-specific gravity, when an email from Muriel popped up. The subject was just my name. The body of the email was a single sentence: "One day they'll call you ma'am." I read it over and over. It wasn't just a platitude anymore. It was a goal. It was a destination. And for the first time, despite the exhaustion and the empty bank account and the long road ahead, I truly believed I could get there. Months bled into a year. My life was a monotonous cycle of work, study, and more work. The library, the pawn shop, the bus, my tiny apartment. I'd lost touch with the few friends I had, my social life reduced to polite nods with the bus driver. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the path I had set for myself. But underneath the exhaustion, something was solidifying. The knowledge was no longer just theoretical, it was instinct. I could spot a piece of costume jewelry, masquerading as fine from across the room. I could estimate the carat weight of a diamond by sight. I understood the ebb and flow of the market, the subtle dance of buying low and selling for a fair but profitable price. Then, one rainy Tuesday, the email I had been waiting for arrived. It was from Mistook. Velasco is ready. He's putting the store on the market quietly next month. He'll meet with you. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. Mistook had arranged the meeting at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop downtown. Mr. Velasco was a small, tired-looking man with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly. He looked exactly like a man who had carried the weight of a family legacy for too long. He remembered my mother. Eleanor Farewell, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. She was a wonderful lady. She didn't just buy jewelry, she appreciated it. She had a true eye for beauty. Not like some of my newer customers, who only care about the size of the diamond. He sighed, stirring his coffee. They have no respect for the craft. I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't tell him I was Eleanor's daughter. I didn't want his pity or his sentiment. I wanted his store. I wanted to earn it. I laid out my business plan. It was a new version, refined and realistic, filled with the hard-won knowledge I'd gained from Mistook. I didn't talk about preservation or sentiment. I talked about modernizing his online presence, reaching a new demographic of buyers who appreciated vintage and bespoke pieces, and honoring the store's legacy by focusing on craftsmanship over flash. He listened, his tired eyes showing a flicker of interest. "You sound like you know what you're talking about," he admitted, "more than the corporate vultures who have been circling." The price he named was daunting. It was more than I could ever hope to secure from a bank on my own. My savings, even with the car money, were a pittance. For a crushing moment, I thought it was all over. I had come so far, only to fail at the final hurdle. I confessed my financial situation to Mistook that evening. I was prepared for a lecture, for a disappointed sigh. Instead, she just nodded, as if she'd been expecting it. "Money is a tool," she said simply, "and I know a man with a well-stocked toolbox." She introduced me to a silent investor, a man she'd known for decades, a wealthy retiree who had a passion for helping small bespoke businesses get off the ground. He didn't want a controlling interest or a seat on the board. He was, in Mistook's words, a patron of the arts. He believed in her judgment, and she, it turned out, believed in me. We met once. He was a quiet, unassuming man who asked me only one question: "Why this store?" I looked him in the eye and told him the truth. Not the whole bitter story about my family, but the core of it. "Because its story was almost erased," I said, "and I want to be the one to finish it." He agreed to finance the majority of the purchase. The loan was structured through an LLC I had created, a shield of anonymity. The paperwork was a mountain, weeks of lawyers, contracts, and financial disclosures. Lennox and Mallory thought I was still just shelving books at the city library. They had no idea I was executing the most significant acquisition of my life. The day I signed the final papers, my hand was perfectly steady. The keys to Velasco and Harper were placed in my palm. They felt heavier than I could have ever imagined. That evening, I walked into the store. My store. The lights were off, the velvet displays shrouded in shadow. It was silent, a sleeping giant. I walked to the main display case, the one right by the entrance, and there they were. Sitting on a velvet bust was a pair of elegant earrings, and next to it a delicate pendant. Each piece was adorned with a single twilight blue sapphire, my mother's sapphires, the ones that hadn't been set into Mallory's bracelet. The jeweler's notes, left by Velasco's staff, indicated they were waiting for a custom design order from a Miss Farewell, Mallory. She was planning to come back for the rest. A wave of cold, pure rage washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. It was followed by a feeling of triumph so profound it almost brought me to my knees. They thought they owned this world. They thought they had taken everything. But I was standing in the heart of their playground, and now I owned the playground. I reached into the case, my fingers closing around the cool, smooth stones. I didn't feel sentimental. I felt powerful. Owning the store was one thing. Wielding that ownership was another. For the first few weeks, I operated in the shadows. I kept the Velasco and Harper name, retained the two elderly staff members who had worked there for decades, and focused on the back end of the business inventory, finances, building a new website. To the outside world, nothing had changed, but I was planning my first move. It wouldn't be a grand, dramatic gesture. It would be quiet, precise, and deeply disruptive. My mother's estate had included a shared family credit card. It was technically an inheritance account, meant for joint expenses related to the estate, but in reality, Lennox and Mallory used it as their personal slush fund. Trips, dinners, designer clothes, it all went on the card. I was a signatory on the account, a fact they seemed to conveniently forget. They saw me as the poor relation, the one who would never dare to question their spending. They were about to learn how wrong they were. One Tuesday morning, I sat down at my new desk in the back office of my new store. I opened my laptop, navigated to the bank's website, and logged into the account. I could see the latest charges: a $5,000 watch for Mallory's fiancé, a weekend at a golf resort for Lennox. My stomach tightened, not with jealousy, but with a cold resolve. I clicked through the account options. It was remarkably simple. 3 clicks. That's all it took. Report card lost, stolen. Deactivate immediately. Issue replacement to primary account holder only. The primary holder was me. A small confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to freeze this account? All associated cards will be deactivated. I clicked yes. A wave of silent seismic power rippled out from my little office. I knew the chaos wouldn't be immediate. It might take a day or two. It would probably happen at the worst possible moment for them, at a fancy restaurant, a boutique, a moment of public peacocking. I didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, the family group chat, which had been silent for weeks, exploded. It was Mallory first. A string of all-caps messages. My card was declined at Neiman's, in front of everyone. This is a nightmare. Did anyone get a fraud alert? A few minutes later, Lennox chimed in, his fury palpable even through text. Mine too. Tried to book flights for the Aspen trip. Rejected. What the hell is going on? Ronan, are you seeing this? Uncle Ronan, ever the peacemaker, responded with a series of confused question marks. I'll call the bank. There must be some mistake. I watched the messages fly back and forth on my phone screen, a small, grim smile on my face. They were scrambling, panicking. The invisible tap of wealth they had taken for granted had suddenly been turned off. I imagined Mallory, her face flushed with embarrassment, standing at the counter. I imagined Lennox, his arrogant bluster deflating as he was told his credit was no good. It was a small thing, a minor inconvenience for people of their means. But it wasn't about the money. It was about control. For my entire life, they had controlled the narrative, the finances, the family dynamic. They had made me feel powerless. Now, with 3 clicks of a mouse, I had taken a piece of that power back. My phone buzzed again. It was a direct message from Lennox. Bryn, did you do something to the card? This isn't funny. I read the message, took a sip of my tea, and set the phone down on the desk, screen side down. I said nothing. My silence was the answer. My silence was the leverage. They were feeling it now. The ground shifting beneath their feet. They had no idea it was an earthquake, and I was standing at the epicenter. For the first time, they were the ones who were confused and in the dark, and I was the one who knew exactly what was going on. This was just the first tremor. The main event was yet to come. The frozen credit card sent a shockwave through the family, but it was just a prelude. The real performance needed a stage, and Lennox, in his infinite arrogance, was the one to build it for me. About a week after the credit card incident, which I never acknowledged and they eventually had to resolve by opening their own separate accounts, an email arrived. It was from Lennox. The subject: Farewell Family New Year's Reunion. Hello all. it began, in his typically brisk and impersonal tone. Given the logistical challenges of the holidays, I thought it would be a good idea for us to get together to ring in the new year. A fresh start. I've taken the liberty of booking a private suite at the Blackwood Resort for the evening. Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. Let's start the year off on the right foot. I had to laugh. The logistical challenges were a direct reference to the card I'd frozen. This wasn't a reunion, it was a power play, a way for him to reassert his control, to gather the family under his banner, in a setting of his choosing, a place where he could be the generous host, the one in charge. My name was on the CC list, almost as an afterthought. It was a reluctant invitation, the kind you extend out of obligation, fully expecting the person to decline. They wanted me there as a prop, the quiet, mousy sister, a living testament to their own success. They expected me to be too intimidated or too poor to show up. They expected me to make an excuse. They were about to be very disappointed. Before I even replied, I made a call. I had spent the last month not just managing the jewelry store, but networking. I had joined the local chamber of commerce. I had attended business owner meet and greets. I had learned that in this world, information and connections were just as valuable as gold, and one of my newest, most valuable contacts was a man named Graham Lynn. Graham was the general manager of the Blackwood Resort. I had met him at a networking event, where I had introduced myself as the new owner of Velasco and Harper. He was cool, professional, and impeccably sharp. He saw the value in a partnership between a luxury resort and a historic fine jeweler. We had already discussed a cross-promotional deal. "Graham," I said when he answered the phone. "Bryn Farewell. I have a strange request. For you, Ms. Farewell." "I'm listening," he replied, his voice smooth and efficient. "My brother Lennox Farewell has booked a private suite for New Year's Eve," I explained. "I'd like to make a few adjustments to the reservation." Unbeknownst to him, there was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his highly professional mind. "This sounds intriguing," he said. "What did you have in mind?" "First," I said, "I'd like to move the dinner from the suite to your most exclusive private dining hall, the one with the view of the city." "The Onyx Room? That's typically reserved for our VIPs and board members," he said. "Exactly," I replied. "Second, I'd like to personally cover the entire cost of the evening. The food, the wine, everything. Please send the bill directly to my company's account. Under no circumstances is my brother to be charged, or even see a bill." Another pause, longer this time. "He'll be a guest at his own party," Graham stated, understanding dawning in his voice. "A guest at my party," I corrected gently. "And finally, I'll need you to be there. Just for a moment, to welcome the party to the Onyx Room." "Miss Farewell," Graham said, and I could hear the smile in his voice now. "Consider it done. It will be my pleasure." After I hung up the phone, a thrill shot through me. It was a bold move, a gamble. But I was done playing defense. I was done reacting to their provocations. I was setting the board myself now. Only then did I open my email and click reply all. My message was simple. "Wonderful idea, Lennox. I'd be delighted to attend. Looking forward to seeing you all." I hit send. I imagined Lennox and Mallory reading it, a flicker of surprise, maybe even annoyance on their faces. They thought they were luring me into their arena. They had no idea they were about to walk straight into mine. The stage was set, the invitations were accepted. All that was left was to choose my costume for the final act. The day before the reunion was a day of quiet preparation. The air in the city was crisp and cold, filled with the electric anticipation of New Year's Eve. While others were planning parties and making resolutions, I was marshalling my forces for a single decisive encounter. In the morning, a courier delivered a final heavy envelope from my lawyer. Inside, printed on thick, watermarked paper, was the last piece of the puzzle. It was the official, fully executed documentation confirming that my LLC was not only the sole owner of Velasco and Harper, but also, through a secondary investment Graham Lynn had helped facilitate, a minority shareholder in the luxury resort group that owned the Blackwood. The power I held was no longer just theoretical. It was tangible, legally binding, and spread across two of the very pillars of wealth my family worshipped: luxury goods and high-end property. I laid the documents out on my desk, my fingers tracing the embossed seals. A wave of vengeful satisfaction washed over me, so potent, it was almost dizzying. It would be so easy to gloat, to shove this in their faces, to revel in their shock. But a voice in my head, a voice that sounded remarkably like Morel, whispered a warning. Rage is a fire that can consume you too. I took out a small sticky note and wrote 4 words on it, pressing the pen down hard. Don't gloat, just win. I stuck it to the edge of my computer monitor, a reminder of my true objective. This wasn't about a momentary victory, it was about a permanent shift in the balance of power. After work, I went shopping, not at the high-end department stores Mallory favored, but at a small, independent boutique I'd discovered. I wasn't looking for sequins or designer labels. I was looking for armor. I chose a dress of simple, elegant design. It was a deep sapphire blue, the color of my mother's eyes, the color of her necklace. It was made of heavy silk that draped beautifully, its quality evident in its cut and construction, not in any ostentatious branding. It was a dress that said, I don't need to shout to be heard. It was a dress that said, I have arrived. That evening I went back to the store. The last of the holiday shoppers were gone, and the street outside was quiet. I walked to the main vault, the heavy steel door swinging open with a satisfying thud. Inside, nestled in a velvet-lined tray, were the pieces of my mother's jewelry I had reclaimed. The earrings, the pendant, and the loose stones. There was one other item in her jewelry box that I'd managed to secure before my siblings could liquidate it. It was a single, simple diamond stud earring. Its partner had been lost years ago, and because it wasn't a set, it had been deemed worthless by Lennox and Mallory and left behind. My mother had always refused to get rid of it. It's still beautiful, she used to say. Just because it's alone doesn't mean it has no value. I picked up the single earring. It felt right. A solitary, brilliant point of light. Underestimated, overlooked, but valuable all the same. I decided it was the only piece of jewelry I would wear. It was a silent tribute to my mother and a symbol of my own journey. I was no longer the sentimental girl who cried over broken promises. I was the owner. I was the shareholder. I was the woman who had learned to be beautiful and valuable all on her own. As I locked the vault, my reflection stared back at me from the polished steel door. I saw the quiet librarian, but I also saw the determined apprentice, the shrewd businesswoman, and the daughter who was about to reclaim her mother's honor. I was ready. The trap was set, and my family was walking right into it. The Onyx Room at the Blackwood Resort was even more stunning than I had imagined. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering city skyline. The table was set for 5, with dark linens, gleaming silver, and a single, dramatic centerpiece of white orchids. I arrived early, wanting to take in the space, to feel the power of it sink into my bones. Graham Lynn met me at the door. Everything is prepared as you requested, Miss Farewell, he said with a discreet smile. My staff understands that all inquiries are to be directed to you. Thank you, Graham, I said. You've been an invaluable partner. The pleasure is all mine, he replied. I confess, I'm looking forward to the evening's entertainment. He gave a slight bow and retreated, leaving me alone in the silent, opulent room. I was standing by the window, my back to the door when they arrived. I heard their voices before I saw them. Lennox's booming, self-important tone, Mallory's high-pitched laugh, and Uncle Ronan's soft, nervous murmur. I thought I booked the presidential suite, Lennox was saying, a note of confusion in his voice. This is something else. It's gorgeous, Mallory exclaimed. Lennox, you really outdid yourself. They entered the room, and for a moment they didn't see me. They were too busy gawking at the view, at the sheer expense of it all. Then I turned from the window. The silence was immediate and absolute. They stared at me, standing there in my simple blue dress, a glass of water in my hand. Their expressions were a perfect portrait of confusion. I was a glitch in their program, an unexpected variable in their carefully constructed evening. Mallory recovered first, plastering on her brittle smile. Bryn, you're here. We were just admiring the room Lennox got for us. It is a lovely room, I said, my voice calm and even. I didn't correct her. Not yet. The awkwardness was a thick, tangible thing. They had expected me to be a footnote to their evening, and instead, I was the first person they saw. They took their seats, a palpable tension settling over the table. The conversation was stilted, forced. Lennox tried to take charge, pontificating about the market forecast for the new year. Mallory showed off a new diamond pendant, a large, pear-shaped stone that glittered aggressively under the soft lighting. "It's a new piece from my fiancé," she announced, angling it so it caught the light. "He had it custom-made. He used some old piece from Mom's collection as the main stone, a rather gaudy old brooch she had. It looks so much better this way, don't you think?" I recognized it instantly. It was from a brooch my grandfather had given my grandmother on their 50th wedding anniversary. A piece of family history, melted down and remade into a trophy. That was the final piece of evidence I needed, the last bit of fuel for the fire. I let them talk for a few more minutes, let them exhaust their shallow topics of conversation. I let the silence stretch out, becoming more and more uncomfortable. Then, when the quiet was at its most profound, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the plain black folder. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound was small, but it landed like a bomb. 3 sets of eyes swiveled from me to the folder. "What's that?" Lennox asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Legal papers." I didn't answer. I just let the folder sit there, a silent testament to the evening's true purpose. Just as Lennox reached for it, the door to the onyx room opened. Graham Lynn stepped inside, his posture the epitome of professional deference. "Good evening," he said, his voice projecting easily into the tense silence. "On behalf of the Blackwood Resort, I'd like to welcome you all to the onyx room." He smiled, but his eyes were on me. "And a special welcome to our VIP guest and the resort's newest business partner." Lennox and Mallory exchanged a confused glance. Uncle Ronan looked nervous. Graham continued, his voice smooth as silk. "We are so thrilled to be hosting this evening's event for the new owner of Velasco and Harper Fine Jewelry." He paused, turning his body slightly to gesture directly at me. "Miss Bryn Farewell." The world seemed to stop, the air crackled. Mallory's perfectly made-up face went slack with shock. Lennox's jaw literally dropped, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Uncle Ronan just stared at me, his eyes wide. I met their gazes, one by one. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I just held their stunned, horrified stares. The nobody, the sentimental fool, the quiet librarian, the owner, the trap had been sprung. The silence that followed Graham's announcement was so complete, I could hear the faint hum of the city traffic far below. It was the sound of a world being turned upside down. Mallory's hand, which had been resting elegantly on her wineglass, began to tremble. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor at first. Then a violent shudder that sent a splash of red wine onto the pristine white tablecloth. She snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned. Lennox, who had been leaning forward to grab the folder, froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pasty white. He looked from Graham, to me, and back again, his mind clearly struggling to process the information. He looked like a computer that had been fed a line of code it simply could not compute. My gaze shifted to Uncle Ronan. He wasn't shocked, not in the same way. His expression was one of dawning, sorrowful realization. His eyes began to water. He looked at me, a silent apology in his gaze. He had enabled their cruelty with his weakness, his constant refrain of, "That's just how things are," and I think in that moment, he knew a reckoning had finally arrived. He had known this day might come. Graham, the consummate professional, acted as if he didn't notice the family drama imploding at the table. He was the neutral observer, the messenger delivering the final fatal blow. He pulled a small leather-bound folio from under his arm. "And as part of our new partnership and commitment to ethical sourcing," he continued, his voice perfectly level, "the resort is implementing a new policy for all jewelry appraisals and acquisitions conducted on the premises, effective immediately." He opened the folio. "All jewelry brought in for sale or trade, without clear and undisputed provenance, will be held for a mandatory 90-day verification period. We will be working closely with Velasco and Harper to authenticate the history of these pieces." My eyes met Lennox's. The meaning behind Graham's words hit him like a physical blow. His face, already pale, seemed to shrink. He understood. Mallory understood. Their entire lifestyle, this performance of effortless wealth, was largely funded by the piecemeal liquidation of our mother's legacy. They had been selling off her history, piece by piece, treating Velasco and Harper like their personal, no-questions-asked ATM. Now the ATM was closed, and the new owner was sitting right in front of them. Provenance, Mallory whispered, the word foreign and ugly in her mouth. What does that mean? It means, dear sister, I said, finally breaking my silence. My voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a year's worth of pain and hard work, that you have to prove you own what you're selling. I finally pushed the black folder across the table toward them, and since I am the primary heir to our mother's estate, as designated in the original will you both chose to ignore, all of that provenance now runs through me. Lennox finally found his voice. It was a strangled, croaking sound. You? You bought the store? And a piece of this resort, I added, gesturing to the opulent room around us. You see, I found that I quite enjoy the world of assets and acquisitions. You were right, Lennox. It's important to be aggressive. The realization finally dawned on them, stark and horrifying. Their wealth wasn't just built on a stolen inheritance. It was built on a stolen inheritance that I now controlled. The source of their funds, the jeweler who turned a blind eye, the entire system they had exploited, it was all mine. The world wasn't just watching, the world was me, and I was not looking away. Mallory stared at the wine stain on the tablecloth, as if it were a mortal wound, her entire glamorous facade crumbling into dust. The hunter had become the hunted, and she was trapped, exposed, and utterly powerless. The panic in her eyes was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The first to break was Mallory. Her shock curdled into a furious, splotchy red that climbed up her neck. Her chair scraped violently against the floor as she shot to her feet, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You snake, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You did this to humiliate us. She looked around the room, at Graham Lynn's impassive face, at the silent waitstaff, as if realizing for the first time that they had an audience. The humiliation she had so freely dished out was now her own, served cold in a 5-star setting. Without another word, she grabbed her ridiculously expensive handbag and stormed out of the onyx room, leaving a wake of stunned silence. One down. Lennox didn't storm out. He was made of a different kind of arrogance, one that believed it could still fight, still dominate. He turned his full fury on me, his eyes blazing. This is insane, Bryn. A librarian. You think you can play in our league? You'll run that business into the ground in 6 months. Maybe, I said, taking a calm sip of my water. But they'll be my 6 months. What do you want? He spat, leaning across the table. Money. Is that it? After all your sanctimonious talk about sentiment, you're just as greedy as everyone else. I looked him dead in the eye. The moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times was finally here, the moment for the perfect, cutting retort. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I was never sanctimonious, Lennox, I said, my voice low and clear. I was just poor. You and Mallory always seem to confuse the two. I learned something this past year, something you never understood. I was poor, not stupid. His face contorted, a mixture of fury and impotence. He had no response. I had taken away his weapons, his money, his status, his ability to condescend. He was left with nothing but his own sputtering rage. He shoved his chair back and stood up, pointing a finger at me. This isn't over. He stalked out of the room, following his sister into their new reality. 2 down. Now it was just me and Uncle Ronan, sitting at the magnificent table in the silent, beautiful room. He hadn't moved. He just sat there, his shoulders slumped, looking older than I had ever seen him. The tears that had been welling in his eyes finally spilled over, tracing paths through the wrinkles on his cheeks. Bryn, he began, his voice thick with shame. I am so sorry. I knew it was wrong, what they were doing. It was easier to go along, to keep the peace. The peace was for you, Uncle Ronan, I said, not unkindly. It was never peaceful for me. I know, he whispered, his head bowed. I should have stood up for you, for your mother. I failed you both. He started to get up, to try and apologize more, to try and fix the unfixable. But I was done. I had no more words for him, no anger, no forgiveness, just a vast empty space where my affection for him used to be. I stood up. "Enjoy the dinner," I said quietly. "I've already paid for it." I turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his regret. I didn't look back. As I stepped out of the Onyx room, Graham was waiting in the hallway. He held my coat for me, his expression one of cool, professional respect. "They were always loud," he said. His voice a low murmur meant only for me. "You were just always listening." His words were a balm. He saw me, not as a victim, not as a vengeful snake, but as a strategist, someone who had observed, planned, and executed, someone who had won. I gave him a small, grateful nod. As I walked through the opulent lobby of the Blackwood Resort, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I wasn't weighed down by their judgment or my own grief anymore. I had met them on their own field, played their own game, and I had won, not by being louder, but by being smarter. Not by being cruel, but by being relentless. I walked out into the cold, clear night. The city was celebrating the start of a new year, and for the first time in a long time, so was I. My apartment felt different when I returned. It was no longer just a refuge from the world, a place to hide. It was a headquarters, a command center, a home I had fought for and secured on my own terms. The silence was no longer lonely, it was peaceful. I took off the simple blue dress and hung it carefully in my closet. Then I walked to my small bookshelf, which was now more of a makeshift altar to my new life. On it, propped up against a stack of gemology textbooks, was my official business license, framed in simple black wood. I took the single diamond stud earring from my ear, the one my mother had kept for its solitary beauty. I placed it gently on the shelf, right next to the license. The earring and the deed, the sentiment and the power, my mother's legacy and my own. They belonged together. The next day, I didn't go to the library. I never would again. I went to Velasco and Harper, my store. I spent the morning with the two elderly staff members, assuring them that their jobs were safe, that my vision was to build on the store's legacy, not erase it. I saw the relief in their eyes. For the first time, I felt like a true CEO, a leader responsible for the livelihoods of others. That afternoon, I bought a bottle of expensive French wine, the kind Mallory would approve of, and drove to the other side of town. The bell above the door of the alchemist's shelf chimed as I entered. Mirelle was behind the counter, appraising a silver pocket watch with her loupe. She looked up as I approached, her expression as stern and unreadable as ever. I placed the bottle of wine on the counter between us. "A thank you," I said simply. She looked at the bottle, then at me. A long moment passed. She set down her loupe. "Did you win?" she asked. "I won," I confirmed. A slow smile spread across her face, a rare and wonderful sight. It transformed her severe features, making her look 10 years younger. "I never doubted you would," she said. "From the first day you walked in here, with all that fire and grief in your eyes, I knew you would either burn out or forge steel." She looked at me, a deep sense of pride in her gaze. "You returned what was taken." Her words were simple, but they captured the entirety of my journey. I hadn't sought revenge, not really. I had sought restoration. I had restored my mother's honor, restored the stolen pieces of her life, and in doing so, restored myself. "My mother always said love is quiet," I said, my voice soft, the words coming to me as if from a dream. She meant it as a good thing, not loud and flashy, but steady and deep. I looked around the quiet, history-filled pawn shop, then back at the woman who had become my mentor, my ally, my friend. "So is power." Mirelle raised her eyebrows, that small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She understood. The loudest people in the room are often the most fragile. True strength, true power, doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. It builds in silence, it holds its ground, and it lasts. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family and proved them wrong? Let me know in the comments below. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more dramatic, true-feeling stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay quiet, stay kind, and build in silence.